France, 1943. Occupied territory. A German officer is standing in the stairwell of a residential building. No alarms, no shouting, no resistance fighters rushing him from the shadows. He turns his head and drops. People on the floors above and below don't react because nothing that sounds like a gunshot reaches them. No crack, no echo, no noise that would make anyone stop and listen. Whoever pulled the trigger walks out of the building unnoticed. The weapon used in situations like this was called the Welrod. It was a British suppressed pistol developed specifically for agents of the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, the organization Winston Churchill tasked with conducting sabotage and covert warfare inside occupied Europe. The Welrod was not meant for combat or firefights. It was built for a much narrower, colder purpose, killing a target at close range in an occupied city without triggering the chain reaction that normally followed a gunshot. By 1941, that chain reaction was well understood. A conventional pistol shot in a dense European city could be heard hundreds of meters away. German patrols reacted quickly. Informants reacted faster. One loud mistake didn't just compromise the shooter. It exposed safe houses, supply routes, and entire resistance networks. SOE needed a firearm that did not behave like a firearm. At the time, so-called silenced weapons already existed, but they were compromises. A suppressed Sten gun reduced the sharp crack of gunfire, but it was still loud enough to be recognized instantly. Suppressed pistols were quieter than standard sidearms, yet still audible through walls and across streets. In an occupied city, that margin was meaningless. So instead of modifying an existing design, British engineers started from scratch. The work was carried out at Station 9, a classified research and development facility near Welwyn Garden City. The team approached the gunshot as an engineering problem, breaking it down into its components. There were three major sources of sound: the explosion of propellant gases at the muzzle, the sonic crack of a supersonic bullet, and the mechanical noise of a semi-automatic action cycling after the shot. The Welrod was designed to eliminate all three. First, the ammunition. The pistol fired a standard 9x19mm cartridge, but with a reduced powder charge that kept the bullet below the speed of sound, roughly 290 meters per second. That alone removed the ballistic crack that no suppressor could hide. Second, the mechanism. The Welrod was not semi-automatic. It used a manually operated bolt, similar in principle to a bolt-action rifle. After each shot, the operator manually cycled the action using a knurled knob at the rear of the weapon. Slow, but mechanically almost silent. Third, the suppressor. Unlike most firearms, the suppressor was not an attachment. It was the weapon. Nearly two-thirds of the Welrod's overall length consisted of internal expansion chambers and baffles designed to trap, cool, and slow propellant gases before they reached open air. The result was unprecedented for its time. A standard 9mm pistol produced sound levels around 160 decibels at the muzzle, enough to cause immediate hearing damage. Contemporary testing placed the Welrod closer to the level of a closing car door. In urban environments, especially indoors, the sound often failed to register as gunfire at all. Physically, the Welrod reflected its purpose. There was no trigger guard. The grip was a simple cylindrical tube housing a 6-round magazine in early versions. The front section looked like nothing more than a piece of industrial pipe. This wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was concealment by design. When Welrods began reaching resistance groups in France, Denmark, and Norway in early 1943, their value became immediately obvious. Guards could be removed without alerting nearby patrols. Targets could be eliminated in buildings where a conventional firearm would have meant instant failure. The Welrod was not powerful. It was not fast. It was not impressive on paper. But it allowed something no other weapon of the time could: violence that left no acoustic footprint. And once that capability existed, silence itself became dangerous. In the next part, we'll look at how the Welrod was actually used in the field, documented resistance groups, real operational constraints, and why this strange British pipe earned a reputation that spread far beyond the people who ever saw it. The Welrod didn't spread through occupied Europe in large numbers, and that was never the plan. This wasn't a mass-issued weapon. It was distributed selectively, often in very small quantities, through clandestine supply drops coordinated by the SOE and local resistance networks. By early 1943, Welrods were reaching resistance groups in France, Denmark, and Norway. In France, they were used by cells associated with the Maquis, particularly for what were often described as executive actions, targeted killings of collaborators, informants, and German officers whose removal had an immediate operational effect. These were not symbolic acts. They were practical decisions aimed at protecting networks and limiting German control. The weapon's value became clear almost immediately. In urban environments, especially stairwells, hallways, and small rooms, the Welrod allowed a target to be eliminated without triggering panic or pursuit. Witnesses often didn't realize anything had happened until a body was discovered. By then, the agent was already gone. In Denmark, resistance groups such as Holger Danske made extensive use of suppressed weapons, including the Welrod. German occupation forces relied heavily on informants, and eliminating those informants quietly was critical. Loud assassinations invited retaliation. Silent ones created uncertainty. People stopped knowing who was safe and who wasn't. That uncertainty mattered. Unlike conventional firearms, the Welrod wasn't designed for speed. Its bolt-action mechanism meant that each shot required manual cycling. The magazine capacity was limited, typically 6 rounds in early versions. Effective range was short, generally under 25 meters, and often much less in practical use. This was not a weapon for mistakes, but within its narrow envelope, it worked exactly as intended. Agents were trained to use it at close distances, often aiming center mass, sometimes even making contact with the target to ensure effectiveness. Accuracy beyond short range was irrelevant. What mattered was that the weapon functioned reliably and quietly every time. The psychological effect on occupation forces was disproportionate to the number of weapons in circulation. German officers quickly understood how to respond to explosions, ambushes, and gunfire. Silence was different. The absence of noise removed the warning signs they relied on. A quiet death offered no opportunity to react, no chance to draw a weapon, no moment to flee. Comparisons with other nations' suppressed weapons only highlighted the Welrod's uniqueness. German suppressed pistols, such as modified Walther models, reduced sound but remained clearly audible as gunshots. American designs, like the high-standard HDM, achieved lower noise levels using .22 caliber ammunition, but at the cost of reliability and stopping power. Multiple shots were often required, which defeated the purpose in many situations. The Welrod's subsonic 9mm round struck a careful balance. It wasn't powerful by battlefield standards, but it was far more decisive than smaller calibers, especially at close range. Combined with its near-silent report, it made the weapon uniquely suited to assassination rather than combat. There were limitations. The internal rubber wipes that sealed gases inside the suppressor degraded over time, reducing effectiveness after repeated use. Maintenance mattered. Ammunition had to be specific. This was not a forgiving system, but that didn't diminish its reputation, because the Welrod wasn't judged by how often it was fired, but by how rarely anyone realized it had been. In the final part, we'll look at why the Welrod remained a niche weapon, how secrecy shaped its legacy, and what this strange British pipe reveals about the kind of war being fought in occupied Europe. The Welrod worked exactly as it was designed to. That, paradoxically, is the main reason it never became widespread. This was not a forgiving weapon. Its effectiveness depended on very specific conditions: short distances, precise ammunition, careful maintenance, and operators trained to use it correctly. The suppressor relied on internal rubber wipes that degraded over time. After a limited number of shots, sound reduction began to fall off. Ammunition had to be loaded to exact specifications. The bolt-action mechanism required calm, deliberate handling under pressure. None of that made the Welrod suitable for mass issue, and that was never the intention. The SOE didn't need thousands of silent pistols. They needed a small number of tools that could solve problems no other weapon could solve. The Welrod filled that role perfectly, but only inside a narrow operational window. Outside it, the weapon offered no advantage at all. As the war progressed, priorities shifted. Large-scale sabotage, coordination with advancing Allied forces, and open resistance became more important than surgical assassinations in urban stairwells. Conventional firearms, explosives, and automatic weapons mattered more than silence. By late 1944, the kind of war the Welrod was built for was already disappearing. After the war, the pistol faded quietly into classification and storage. It was never celebrated. It didn't appear in victory parades or propaganda films. Many production details remain uncertain even today, not because they were lost, but because they were never meant to be known. That secrecy shaped its legacy. The Welrod didn't change the outcome of the war. It didn't win battles or capture territory. What it changed was something narrower and more unsettling. It altered the relationship between violence and sound. It proved that a firearm didn't need to announce itself to be effective, and that in an occupied city, silence could be more disruptive than noise. That idea outlived the weapon itself. Modern suppressed firearms owe much to the same logic, even if technology has moved on. But few have followed the Welrod's philosophy as strictly. Most weapons compromise between performance and quiet. The Welrod refused to compromise at all. It was not built to be admired. It was built to be unnoticed. And in the kind of war fought in occupied Europe, being unnoticed was often the most dangerous thing of all. If you're interested in weapons like this, not the loud ones, not the famous ones, but the tools built for very specific problems, this channel is exactly about that. No myths, no gaming nonsense, just real history, real engineering, and the ideas behind objects that were never meant to be seen. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, because the most important things in history are often the ones that worked quietly and were almost forgotten.